Just wait.
Welcome to Flight Club. We take off soon. Make yourself comfortable. We recommend getting a drink and headphones. Yes, headphones are essential. The first rule about Flight Club is you do talk about Flight Club. The second rule about Flight Club is you do talk about Flight Club. This flight will never stop. Welcome to Flight Club. Welcome to Flight Club. This flight will never stop.
Flight Club. Flight Club. Flight Club. Flight Club.
Welcome to Flight Club. We take off soon. Make yourself comfortable. We recommend getting a drink and headphones. Yes, headphones are essential. The first rule about Flight Club is you do talk about Flight Club. The second rule about Flight Club is you do talk about Flight Club. This flight will never stop. This flight will never stop. Welcome to Flight Club. We take off soon. Welcome to Flight Club. This flight will never stop.
Hello everyone and welcome to Flight Club. My name is Klaus Leopold and today we have two wonderful guests and we will cover very crazy and cool topics, I'm pretty sure. Co-host means there's a second person who's hosting it, which is...
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Flight Club. My name is Cliff. We have another show for you again this evening. Some of you joined us last night. We were talking to Dana in the closing of the Lean Global 2021 conference. So for those of you who are joining for this evening, I see there are folks joining from all around the world. Very nice to have you join us. I take a quick moment to say we do this roughly once every 2 weeks. So if you like our content and you enjoy what we talk about today, please hit the like and subscribe button. Would be super cool. And of course, you will get notifications about the next time we talk to someone awesome as well. But let's actually switch the conversation topic and introduce you to our guest this evening. We have Mr. Jim Benson and Tonianne DeMaria. Can I ask you to give us quickly a quick sense of who you are? What I can say so far is you are the co-founders of Modus Cooperandi, if I'm pronouncing this correctly. Is that how you pronounce it, actually? Can you tell us a bit about this name?
We say cooperandi, but they're both correct. DeMaria would be more correct than DeMaria, but the name Modus Cooperandi means actually creating systems of collaborative work. So we get together as individuals in teams to provide value, and ever since we started the company, our goal was performance through collaboration. So teams that work together, that collaborate together, tend to deliver better just across the board, better on-time performance, better understanding of what they do and who they are, etc.
Awesome. Tonianne, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to this place where we're having this conversation today? You know Klaus and Katrin from before we met during the prep and so on, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having us, and thank you everybody for joining us this evening. So my formal training is in history. Back in Washington, D.C., I worked as a public historian, focusing on collective memory, looking at the creation of official narratives surrounding monuments and memorials and museums. And I had an opportunity about 14 years ago to write a corporate history for a Beltway consulting firm. And that was where I had my eureka moment. I stumbled upon the owner's copy of The Fifth Discipline. And that was where I was introduced to the concept of systems thinking and organizational development. And that was where I was really hooked, I would say. So it took me some time before I could really appreciate the common thread. You know, we were talking about the red thread, things that run through, you know, time and space and people and elements that connect. And I've been thinking about, you know, what was that thing that connected history to management consulting and coaching. And it's that you become essentially a cultural anthropologist of sorts, right? You're observing people that are connected by some common cultural system that organizes and shapes their worldview, and in turn informs their values, their behaviors, their social and their physical environment, which in turn informs the value that they're creating or the product, or, you know, it informs some type of value creation that they're engaged in. And so historians, like management consultants, are always observing these patterns in these cultures, and they're always thinking in terms of systems, and systems that rub up against other systems, not least of which is human systems, right? Human behavior. So while Jim and I spent a lot of time working at the intersection between lean and agile and management theory and behavioral economics and neuroscience and productivity and effectiveness, and what's going on in your office and in your team, all of that would be meaningless if we didn't look at, you know, Dr. Deming said in a system of profound knowledge, that we have to have an understanding of what really drives people's behaviors, and that is an understanding of psychology. And so that's what Jim and I have been doing a lot lately. We've been going into organizations, looking at their work systems, and together with the teams that are, we're trying to figure out, what behaviors and actions would their ideal state require, and how do we help them create healthy, humane systems to get there. So that's how I got here.
Cool. It sounds like a very interesting background. I'm looking forward to digging into this a lot more as we have our conversation. I want to remind everybody on the live stream to please ask questions in the chat as we go. We will try to weave them into the conversation as much as possible. And I'm pretty sure it will make the conversation become even more interesting than it would be otherwise. So please fire away questions and comments in the chat. It's nice to be able to have interaction with all of you as well. Cool. So I wanted to kind of connect the topic a little bit before we get too far into our conversation. But in kind of the preparation, we were talking about this idea that kind of your focus is a lot, as you've said, in sort of the space around psychology, and obviously a lot of and a lot with the Flight Levels Academy and with Flight Levels is kind of talking about systems. And there's obviously a lot of intersection between these two topics, as you've already pointed out. So I'm wondering, one of the things that we talk about in the Flight Levels world, specifically when we talk about building Flight Level 2 systems, is this idea of building, kind of having the right team doing the right stuff at the right time. How do you think about this when you kind of put a psychology lens on it, and what's been your experience with this?
Jim, do you want to talk about that?
You take it.
We have a lab, so I wanted to make sure I didn't step on your toes.
It's all right. So I'll take this one. You can take the next one, and we'll just ping pong. You can't build any team without the team understanding who it is, why it's there, and what it's supposed to be doing. So if you build any visual, any Kanban, and you think that it is your sum total of your visual controls, you're usually wrong. And so most Kanbans just track the flow of work. And those don't track relationships, they don't track communication, they don't track why people are there to do the work in the first place. So when you say like these, that systems are, dovetail with this, they dovetail with it because it's also a system. So we have social systems, political systems, workflow systems, intake systems, onboarding systems. All of these things are systems, but the key to all of them is that they all involve people. So if you have a work intake system that doesn't think about like, how do the professionals on this team actually want to learn, how can they improve, how do they work together, how do they communicate? If you're not taking those things into account, you're just going to build a dumb board that is just focused on getting tickets from the left to the right. So the way that we handle flight levels in our world is we make sure that the right information is getting to the right people at the right time. And that always requires what you all call flight levels, different visualizations at different elevations of the work, and that those visualizations have different information that's necessary for the people, the professionals, to do a good job. And so when we talk about psychology, we're not talking about psychology like, oh, are you okay? We're talking about psychology like, hey, you're a professional. Do you have what you need to get your work done? Do you have the triggers, the information, the space to be able to act effectively?
So, something I found quite fascinating in sort of facilitating workshops of building different systems is how often I get the comment from people that, wow, we've never really talked about a lot of this stuff. And so much of the conversation is sort of surfacing these things of like, I have this assumption. I mean, a lot of it kind of starts out at the process level, obviously, but getting into like, well, what do you even like? Like, what's important for you? What are your needs? How do we meet some of those? But I find it really fascinating that there's this sort of assumption that somehow we know how the work works, and we kind of know humans, so we know what they need and what they don't need, and so we just kind of skip over it. And I've seen a couple of times, and certainly in my early in my career as a coach, kind of trying to build the board for people as if that's somehow going to magically create the things that we need to be able to move forward. So yeah, I like what you're saying on that. Yeah.
So may
Klaus,
I just extend
go for it.
what you just said?
Yeah.
You know, the things that we don't talk about, right, at work. It's like we've never really talked about our needs. I would argue, our generation took for granted the fact that our organizations are going to provide us a certain level of physical safety. But we're learning so much about the brain and how the brain, especially in knowledge work, its role in knowledge work, the PFC especially, knowledge work, that it's no longer sufficient enough to just worry about somebody's physical well-being at work. As practitioners, we need to start building systems that take into account people's social needs, right? Because there's this overlap in the brain that responds to both physical pain and social pain. They've done fMRI studies, and they've had the subjects recall while they're in the fMRI machine, experience of social pain. And the part of the brain that lights up when they talk about the social pain, like rejection, like loss of a loved one, like feeling excluded, the part of the brain that lights up is actually the part of the brain that likewise lights up for or registers for physical pain. So when we do this, when we have cultures that don't acknowledge these needs, or these systems that don't acknowledge what people need beyond, their physical needs, that impedes the very tool that we are hiring people to employ as knowledge workers, right? Prefrontal cortex, you're essentially your brain CEO. It's where all of our higher level thinking exists, right? So it impedes our ability to problem solve, to critically think, to prioritize, to make decisions. So it's not a nice to have. There is a business imperative to taking care of people's social needs.
Yeah.
There's actually a cool question in the chat already related to this. But Klaus, I don't know if you were going to point this out, or if you wanted to say something else first.
No, just let's take the question. So I think you are referring to Tim Nolan, right? Who's asking,
yes, so
what is actually the simplest way to make your standard workflow visualize more humane? I mean, visualize situation, that's the first practice, the first activity when it comes to flight levels. And visualization is a cool thing, but humane, I like this question. Any thoughts on this?
So one of the interesting things about the question that Cliff asked and how it dovetails into this is one of the most frequent conversations, or one of the most frequent results at the end of a day that we hear is people say, wow, this has been great. And they realize that they don't have time at work to talk about work. And we go crazy trying to build systems that are dumb, like idiotic, to placate people's personal needs. So we'll do bowling nights and things like that, and we'll think that is the instantiation of culture. But culture is just as visualizable, if that's a word, and as implementable and as maintainable as any other relationship or workflow that we have. And so what we do is we first take people through an exercise that we call a team charter, or just a chartering exercise. But we examine with the team what is important to you as professionals. At Turner Construction, they call that the right environment. And the right environment for them is, do professionals have the information they need to make decisions and do work at the time they need it? Not unlike when we say that we would like the right work to be done at the right time. Strangely enough, the right work can't be done at the right time if you don't have the information that you need to do the work when you are a person who works with information. And we are notoriously bad at hiding information in Slack or in Zoom chats or in emails or on Team server or on whatever. We've got so many places to hide and lose information now that people can only interrupt each other and bother each other when they do work, which not only lowers throughput, but it psychologically is damaging for everybody that's involved. So you get into a flow state where you're working on your work, and the next thing you know, you're being interrupted by somebody who's asking a question for a third time because they can't find the answer that you gave them before. So I am going to share my screen, or I'm going to click the share screen button. Hopefully it will work. It seems to be working.
See it.
So zoomed out. This is our current modus operandi.
Just a minute. Okay.
Bing!
Yes.
There it is.
Here it is. It's working.
Okay. The beautiful thing about lag is it builds suspense. So let's just think about this for flight levels, right? So I zoom all the way out now, and I can see by the black stickies what current work is in progress. So Dave is here, Alex is here, Tony is there actually. I just finished something, so I don't have anything that's really active. There are some blue stickies here that show that these things are on the plate. They're a handoff from Jim and Tonianne. Right now, our focus this week is getting stuff out about value stream mapping. So we're in the middle of writing a blog post. So these things are, they're actually colored. They're but they're colored because they're ready for a handoff to Tonianne. This is the handoff to Tonianne color. So when I zoom out, I can see what is happening in multiple things at multiple times. And they're not flowing through a single value stream, because we've come to find that it's beautiful but rare that works for most knowledge working teams. So we have a lot of things that we're discovering in real time. So I don't think there's an example right now, but if I were to zoom in on one of these normally, well, there's a comment here. So this little green thing is a comment as we're having a conversation in the board, right? And why are we doing this? We're doing this because our culture is about making sure that we get the right information at the right time and that everyone feels supported. And we understand that when we ask a question here, it requires attention, but not immediacy. So then when we use Slack is now a tool of immediacy. So if something comes up, Tonianne puts something in Slack, I know I need to respond to it immediately. So we've divided out how we can actually ask each other for assistance. And that is that's a quick way, just a nickel tour of how we have taken things that we needed culturally to make sure that people felt respected, that they were communicated with, that our relationships remained strong, that we were able to constantly learn, that our work maintained a certain amount of flow. Mm. But that flow doesn't have to happen from left to right. So what we've found is that those types of Kanban do not provide the fidelity of information that teams that are working with creative processes need.
Yeah, that creative processes. I mean, that's a very good point. So creative processes. So on the very left side of, even before it comes to a value stream, it's more like a sticky note explosion most of the time. So it's not there is no real flow. So flow starts a little bit later. Yeah. So
well, and for us, so in that board, like let's say that we have seven episodes of Collaborwalkie, our podcast. Let's say we have 7 episodes that we're working on simultaneously. So one of them is almost ready to release, the next one's just on deck, and the other ones are getting prepped. All of those aren't just a ticket flowing. They have conversations that are happening. And so if you put text into a Trello ticket, it's buried. It's not, the question itself isn't visualized, but The question is actually the thing that's in process.
Mm.
The state of the creation of that object requires that in question be asked and answered in order for the flow state to be achieved. Not to get overly technical about it. And so if we put that in Slack, it's now divorced from the Gemba. It's now divorced from the Obeya. It's divorced from where the work is being visualized. If we bury it in the ticket, we're going to have to send a Slack message saying, can you go look in the ticket? Even if it sends you a frickin' email. So what this does is it removes all of those middle people.
Mm.
And it also, like I said, allows you to zoom out to that outside flight level and see strategically what's going on, and then go in, level by level to see what's really happening or what people really need.
That I like this kind of visualization. Actually, it already triggers some thoughts how we could transport this to like something like flight routes and connecting the flight levels together. So food for thought for me. That's perfect. But I will take a look at another thing. So in flight levels we have an activity which says create focus. So you were saying, okay, we're working on 7 podcast episodes or something like this, right? So the idea behind Create Focus is that we want to not start an infinite amount of work. We just want to focus on a certain amount of work, because the let's say the behavior that we want to see is that. Let me put it economically. Starting work costs money. Finishing work brings money, right? So we want to shift the entire conversation and even the thinking to finishing work. And that's the reason why we create focus. So you can create focus with different things. Whip limit is known from the Kanban world. There's also something like in Scrum, like time boxes. We have a certain amount of work, but only a limited time effort. So there can only a certain amount of work being done in parallel. And we've discovered 4 different ways of how to create focus. So from a systemic point of view and economical point of view, it's just great. We earn more money, everything's faster, and so on. But from a humane, from a human perspective, what does it do if we're creating focus?
I'd say there are lots of you're obviously talking to the 2 people who only had 2 rules, and they were visualize your work and limit your work in progress. Tony, do you want to talk about deep work, and then I'll talk about the focus system that we're using now?
Well, with regard to creating a humane system, simply visualizing, externalizing our Gemba, like we're currently doing in Miro, that offloads a lot of that decreases the need for cognitive energy from me, right? Because I know exactly where to go for information. I have the autonomy to make decisions. I don't have to go to somebody else to make decisions. There's transparency. I understand how I'm related to the ultimate goal, to the end product. And so that in itself, visualizing everything, allows me to have the clarity I need that kind of calms the noise in the back of my mind, or I should say in the front of my mind. So it allows me, being able to achieve a sense of process flow, a steady cadence, steady throughput, likewise contributes and is informed by my psychological flow. So in one of our old boards, we would have our doing column, but we actually had physical buffers on both sides of our doing column so that we can just focus on what was there. For me, right now with focus, especially with COVID, especially not having more definition in my life between my workday and beyond the workday, I've had to use some take some draconian acts in my own life to get focus, and one of those was social media. just getting rid of push notifications on my desktop, on my phone, with the exception of Slack. Anytime Jim and Dave and the rest of Modus has to get in touch with me, that's basically it. But just having, creating less distractions for myself and giving myself all the clarity I need around the way that work has to get done, simply by virtue of that, helps me get into more of a flow state. Not having to question what comes next, what is my role, what authority do I have to pull work. That has helped me tremendously.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've found is that one of the greatest, probably the greatest aid in achieving personal flow, psychological flow, workflow, any of the number of flows there are, is clarity. And that's like clarity of expectations, clarity as a group. And so I just want to zoom in on something here, and then share my screen again. There we go. So in that thing I just showed you was this part down here at the bottom. And so what we realized was that we are a small group of people that has and we're intentionally a small group of people. As part of our culture is to remain what we are. And but we have big aspirations. And so we need to deliver quickly, and we need to keep the lights on. So no matter how awesome we want to be over the course of a week, we still have to do accounting. So what we've done is we've divided, we went through a large exercise where we figured out what are all of the things that we need to do over the next 6 months. We built a series of big and small bets about those. So basically a set of objectives and key results. And the objectives had projects underneath them, and we've been selecting those projects one at a time and getting them done and trying to time box them as best as practical in a 1 week slot. So this week is, like I said, is the VSM stuff. So we've got a blog post, we've got a video, we've got some improvements to our internal value stream mapping for knowledge work class on the Modus Institute site. We want to announce that we've done those things and tweet and put some articles and a newsletter together. And then we have some KPIs for what we want out of that. And we have conversations around this, and we just mark them as we're going through and they're getting done. And then we just watch them gradually turn black. So this becomes, again, you can zoom way out, all the way out to here and know how that's going. And that's important because we're all really busy doing all of the other stuff that might be down there in that other Kanban. When I said that we would have 7 of these in flight, that's because you got to schedule stuff. So whip limiting is a function of your ability to focus at the right time on the right thing, but it is not to pretend like the rest of the world doesn't exist during periods of time. So we need to make sure that whatever we do here accounts for the amount of time that we're going to need to spend doing the other things, doing daily operations, being able to do things like this. This podcast right now is not part of what we would focus on this week, but it's incredibly important. So we need to make sure that everyone at Modus Cooperandi understands what is being done, when, why, and by who, and what we need from each other. And that's how we maintain focus. And the other thing I'll note for this that Tonianne didn't mention is that we use Pomodoros like
as much as we use personal Kanban.
You possibly can. Yes. Sorry, my analogy generator completely broke there. But the reason that we use them is because we understand them as a group. So if Tonianne throws up a tomato on her name in Slack, we know don't bug her till the tomato's gone. And if the tomato stays up there all day, we'll say something like, "You forgot to take down your tomato."
Yeah.
But we're also pretty good at doing the Pomodoro and then checking in with everybody else and then doing the next Pomodoro. So deep work. And I guess the last bit of that is focus is not an individual act. Focus is always a collaborative act, even if you're alone. So my ability to focus relies on Dave and Tonianne and Alex and everybody else not bugging me, while I'm focused. But focus can also happen in our huddles. So we get together in our huddles, which last an hour. Anathema, I know, but it's because it's focus time for the group. The group gets together and moves tickets together. We make decisions together, and we do as much of that as possible in that hour so that we don't do it for the rest of the day. And that's important because we've got people in other countries that don't match our time zones. And it also means that we know that since we've got a luxury of an hour, that we can wait and ask people questions when we get in there. So when Alex shows up in Eastern Europe, Alex doesn't show up to 75,000 things in Slack. He comes into the call and we have some balanced conversations.
You know, something you said, Jim, goes back to what Cliff mentioned before. Cliff, when you were talking about, you know, not knowing we had these social needs, or these are the things that we never spoke about. Our current system, our current modus at Modus, resulted from most of us looking at each other and saying, you know, how we're working currently is not working. So Jim and I were constantly task switching throughout the course of the week. And by Friday, we were just fried that we weren't getting any of our major writing projects done. And so we recognized we needed to do something about that, because we were both getting resentful that the very thing that brought us, you know, I mean, arguably you have to do everything that needs to be done when you have a small business. You don't get the luxury of just doing what you went into business for. You have to do, you know, all the supporting activities. But we missed writing. And, you know, both of us are in the middle of writing books right now. And we're sneaking in. So what we did is we're like, you know what, what we're doing isn't working. Let's clear Fridays and just make those are just writing days. And those have become sacred at Modus. Now, granted, if there's a problem, of course, we'll revisit. But that goes back to the respect element. You know, we make sure that at Modus, we give professionals anything and everything they need to act as professionals. Right?
Is the point of Friday to be fried? No, sorry.
Yeah.
To be honest, we were actually fried by Thursday at noon, and then Friday we were just cranky.
Yeah. And that's not doing anyone any favors. I just wanted to resonate with what you were saying, both of you, on the topics of focus and kind of making space. I've talked a couple of times about this metaphor that I picked up actually at my time at Spotify, but we use this sort of general heuristic for talking of the idea of creative focus is don't let number 3 block number 1. And the intent of this was not to be an absolute, like, never kind of bend the rule or whatever. But the scenario that people most common think of is that you are working on number 1 and I am working on number 3. You need my help. I should stop and help you. But there's several other flip sides to this, which is that you're working on number 1 and I'm about to ask you for help, but I know that you're on number 1 and I know that you shouldn't help me. So I don't interrupt you. And I can actually stay out of your way. And it's quite interesting how often that became useful within the company. And I've seen several other companies using it. I'm super focused on this thing. Please can everybody, whether it's a Pomodoro or the tomato logo, emoji at least, or something like this, but just these simple signals that say, please don't bother me. I'm not being rude. I'm just focused on this thing. And as long as, to connect it back to the clarity, as long as we have clarity of what that purpose or reason why that's happening, it really does help. So I think I've seen this working really, really well.
It's a social contract.
I wanted to, yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of where we started out, talking about the social contracts and the constructs that we create and how important it is to invest time and energy in building these things. Because, Klaus and Katrin and myself have been working together for almost 2 years now. And we're still having some conversations. Oh, these roles and responsibilities, and this is how we visualize the board, and this is what we agree. And we have some kind of, because all of us have different assumptions because we've worked in different ways, we have personal preferences, we have different styles, all of this kind of stuff. And I love those sort of moments of like, it's been a little bit tricky to figure it out, and then we sort of find, oh, okay, cool, this is working so much better, and now we have a better way of doing something. And for sure, some weeks and months down the line, we're going to have another conversation about it, and we're going to tweak it and make it better. But that's kind of the point. That for me is such a big aspect of what I like about working with other people. And so I like it when we found some good ways that we can share with others. I want to change the topic ever so slightly, if you will, and kind of continuing in this theme of talking about the flight levels activities. But we talk about this idea of measuring progress in the flight levels world. And we often get this question of sort of, what metrics do you use, or how do you tell if it's working, kind of thing. I guess I want to sort of frame this question a little bit differently for the context of this conversation. But what are some of the sort of outcomes or the signals that you would see when the stuff is starting to work? And if you could contrast that with what are some of the sort of signals that you might see when it's maybe not working so well, or signs that you need to dig deeper and explore this kind of space a little bit more?
Oh, I love that question. So we have a lot of observations about what we'll just say initially what a highly performing team looks like, or a team that has taken its first steps into highly performing. I would say that my first personal metric is that teams show signs of moving from an accountability model to a responsibility model, which means they're not waiting around to be told what to do. They're taking responsibility for their own work, their own actions, and they're devising their own intake systems for work and their own relationships with those that would provide them work. That is often something that we think a Kanban does automatically, but I also think that those of us who have worked in it know that it does not. It's helpful because you can visualize that intake process. But it doesn't, as Tonianne used the word social contract a minute ago, it doesn't create that initial social contract. So when people start taking responsibility again for creating new social contracts between their team members and between their team and other teams, where they break out of their own little personal silo, that would be my second metric. My third metric is, do the teams understand what quality means? And almost every team I've seen that has been under the influence of recent management practices, they're all fixated on the definition of done. And they're fixated on the definition of done because they actually don't know what quality is. So when teams begin to build those relationships and those ways of working that have better interactions with their customers, the definition of done simply becomes, how are we going to deliver this particular product? The other reason that the definition of done is important now, but an indication of failure demand, is that we think that done is a state. And not that done is part of the process of creating something. So when any team understands that they're not finished being professional when they've delivered something, but that's now part of your PDSA cycle, and that PDSA cycle is visualized, and that PDSA cycle is leading to real, tangible, sticky notes moving through the Kanban, that would be my last indication. You'll notice that throughput, cycle time, and those types of things aren't in there, because I find that those happen naturally once teams enter that legion of responsibility.
I kind of like this approach, and I think it's not too far away what we think. So at least in flight levels, there are no like predefined metrics. So it's not about, you have to, I don't know, measure cycle time, and otherwise if you don't do it, you will burn in flight levels hell or something like this. It's more like we're like, what's the problem we are trying to solve? So the very first thing that we try to figure out is, why are we actually building this flight level system here? And when we ask the question, okay, how do we see that we are making progress? We define a metric, and this metric is a feedback loop, which tells the entire work environment, all the people, okay, that's what we want to achieve. But we don't stop there. It's like, okay, one thing is that's what we want to achieve, but then the other thing is, okay, but what do we need to do in terms of countermeasures so that we don't sub-optimize the system? Because, becoming faster is quite easy if you just drop quality. So we try also to, come up with countermeasures. So this is more like a, let's say, an individual kind of metric system, measurements. And that's also why we call it measure progress. So are we making progress towards the thing that we actually want to achieve? So because doing flight levels for the sake of doing flight levels is quite unsexy. I mean, doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, Tony?
I was going to say, I'm almost wondering if there's another metric in there that has to precede all of that. Because for me, this is if I want a high performing team, this is the metric that I look for. Because if my people have the physical and the social, psychological safety that they need to do their work, they will learn quicker, they will contribute faster, they will challenge the status quo, and that's where innovation comes from. So for me, it's the well-being of my employees. Again, going back to the care and feeding of their prefrontal cortex, right? Their executive functions. You don't have a knowledge worker if you don't have healthy executive functions.
I think, Cliff, you...
Yeah. I have a quote that I've used in a couple of the talks that I do, which
exactly thinking of.
I'm trying to find the attribution, actually, because I'm not sure who it's from, but it's not originally mine, but people seem to attribute it somehow to me. But the quote says that if you assume that you have dead wood inside your company, there's only two ways that it got there. Either you hired dead wood, or you hired live wood and you killed it. And both of these are something that you can do something about. And I think it's quite interesting because I think to connect with what you're saying, Tonianne, is that it's so often that we bring people into the organization to try to do something useful or meaningful, or because they have special expertise. And then we put a bunch of rules and barriers and restrictions and constraints in the way that basically just suck all the life and motivation and joy out of anything that they're doing. And then go, you're a bad person. Why aren't you doing whatever? I find it just absolutely fascinating. And so I spend a lot of time trying to help people see that, the point is that you can't necessarily, I mean, there are probably some things you can do that will create some sort of environmental motivation, but it's much more about removing the demotivators than it is about trying to apply in a sort of very mechanistic kind of way. We give you a carrot or a stick, and that's going to motivate people. Yeah,
100%. We are really good at building prisons with parks in front of them. And then people come and they spend some time in the park, and we're like, hey, you want to come here full time? And then they go through the doors and they're like, whoa, this is a panopticon. We excel at horrific management structure, and that goes back over 100 years. So it's hard to break people of those impulses. The impulse of going to command and control when you run into ambiguity. That becoming fixated on a specific deadline makes you willfully blind to problems in your production process. That becoming overly obsessed with making a certain amount of money makes you mistreat the people who work for you, and then makes them work less effectively because they resent the hell out of you. It is fascinating, but it's a fascinating thing that I would love to not be fascinated by anymore.
Yeah. I'll take a quick moment to just remind everyone on the live stream that if you have questions, we are sort of moving forward in time. So if you'd like to ask some questions, I recommend asking them relatively soon. Otherwise, we're quite happy to just continue having the conversation that we're having. Yeah. So I want to turn the conversation a little bit to this topic of strategy, if I can, because I think so often what happens, at least in my experience, has been that people sort of say, well, the strategy that they're encountering is either they just don't know what it is, or it's really bad. And I think that both of those things can be true at sometimes, but very often what happens is, we were talking sort of about clarity earlier, but the level of visibility and the level of actual understanding of what the strategy is often so low. And I think not so much only for the people who are sort of on the, I don't know if receiving end or whatever, but that's usually, I guess, how it plays out in the organization. But the people who are being told this is the strategy get this kind of soupy mush of sort of list of goals and some kind of a thing in this space that doesn't necessarily make any sense. I'm curious from your experience, like, what do you see in this kind of a space? I mean, you're running an organization yourself. Do you have something like a strategy? How do you use this? What do you think makes a good strategy in this kind of a setting?
As completely messed up as our concept of leadership is, that is how completely messed up our understanding of what strategy is. So strategy, it is as you said, Cliff, it's presented to people like here is the strategy, not this is how we came up with it, this is what we meant by it. So it would literally be like somebody came to you and just said, Rosebud was his sled, or Luke blows up the Death Star. You're like, who cares? But the story, the narrative behind the strategy is actually the strategy. And no one wants to watch a movie or a video of 26 hours of leaders sitting in a room arguing about strategy and then coming up with the soupy statements that they did. So strategy needs to be something that is shared throughout all parts of the organization. It needs to be part of the organizational social contract, because people don't have to buy into the strategy, because that, again, is something that it's a commodity that we're giving to you. The strategy as it's set up needs to be something that people actually believe in. And they can believe in it religiously, or they can believe in it because they're actually informed and they know that it's something tangible that they can believe in. So when we help groups set up their strategy, we make it part and parcel of that conversation of what their culture is. What are you doing? Who are you doing it for? Why are you doing it? What allows you as a professional to get that done? Where is the market ready to accept new things from you? Where is the market asking for things that you're not currently providing? Where is the market running ahead of you? If everyone in the team, everyone in the whole company understands and is part of those conversations, you're going to get a very deep nested set of strategies that allow you to exploit both large and small things. And when we do exercises like this with groups, you can still do this with a vision. So like a CEO can have a vision, and the CEO can come in and say, this quarter, I want to just focus on these 3 things. But then you take those 3 things to the rest of the company and you say, okay, now how do we instantiate these? And you get them to work on that as a mass project. So we did this once with like 160 people in a 160 person company. All of the devs, all of the customer support people, the accountants, HR, everyone worked on how to implement these 3 vision statements. And they ended up rewriting one of them with the blessing of the CEO, who previously was like, damn it, do what I say. Because the conversations were deep enough to make all of that work. One of the things I would love to rewrite is that there's a difference between vision and strategy, and we don't take advantage of that difference enough.
I think it's interesting because with a lot of the work that I've been doing, specifically with flight levels, what we see starting to emerge is that as the conversations across the different layers, and I refer to them not as sort of levels of management. I think people often make that mistake. It's levels of granularity and usually some sort of levels of time horizon. So smaller things at the bottom, bigger things at the top, that kind of thing. And it's probably that there are some people who are focused a little bit more on one part of the other. But if one person is only focused on one part and not aware of how the other sort of views or the other aspects of it kind of fit together, or completely very weird space. And so what we see is not only within the bounds of a single system are we starting to have a conversation about what are actually the boundaries of the system, what is it responsible for, but how does it connect to the broader organization? So someone who's working primarily at the team level doing something in HR or finance can see actually how that layers up or doesn't to the strategy and kind of challenge that and say, oh, but I'm doing this thing and it's not part of the strategy. But you said that we're a very strategic part of the business and I'm looking at all the things we're doing and these don't connect. Or, oh, actually, for the first time in my life, I now see how they actually connect. And that's super cool because I have some sense of purpose connected to the reason behind why I'm doing this, not just a Post-it note on a wall. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Tony, how do you think this relates to the work we've been doing with our unnameable, completely distributed team, and how they've been working with internal strategy and then relating that back to the bigger part of the corporation?
I'm actually confused which one you're talking about.
The one that has some people in California and Iowa and.
You know, what's really funny is I was going to bring up one of the quotes that one of the managers had shared with me. He said, "I feel really protected by my organization." So there's definitely a tremendous amount of psychological safety there. There's a tremendous amount of safety to contribute to challenge the status quo there. I feel like you're leading me to say something specific, and I don't know where you want me to.
No, your conversations recently have been right at that intersection between strategy, daily work, and in kind of internal rule definition.
And what's been really neat is that those conversations that I've been having have been with leadership as well as frontline. So even frontline feels that they have the ability to contribute no matter their pay grade or their positional power, which has been really, really cool. I was actually looking for a tweet that I sent myself yesterday that sort of goes back to this a little bit. If I could take 1 second. It was a mother was sharing an engagement she had with her 8-year-old boy. And she said, "How was your day?" And he said, "I just worry that they're doing it wrong." And she said, "Doing what wrong?" And he said, "They separate everything so we can't really understand everything. Who said music isn't really math or math isn't really science? Somebody made categories, but the world is much mushier than that." That's an 8-year-old. That's an 8-year-old acknowledging systems thinking. We beat it out of people. And then we get into organizations and we're like, your strategy has to be different than, your mission, your vision, your goal, and what we're seeing with that one organization that Jim is talking about is that everybody has a hand in creating that strategy. Everybody is able to, find flaws with it. Everybody is able to improve it. And that's what's been really cool with that organization. That I wish we didn't have to blind item, but we do. Someday maybe we won't.
I love that quote from the kid, and I mean the wisdom from an 8-year-old that's quite profound in and of itself, and then from an 8-year-old additionally is, I like that. So we're probably actually in a good place to start to wrap up for this evening. So I'm wondering if you could tell us very quickly, people want to reach out to you or have some conversation for this. Is there some way that they can contact you? LinkedIn the best place, or what do you recommend?
Well, LinkedIn is always good. and that uses both of our names, which makes it easy to find us. Twitter is not good for me. I get in trouble all the time. I get into Twitter and I have like 700 tweets. But if you go to modusinstitute.com or moduschooperandi.com, there's actually a live chat tool there. and we are, I wouldn't say perfect, but we're better than not perfect at answering that. But my quick closing statement would just be that it should be pretty clear. And as Barbara said, yes, I am lucky to work with Tonianne. And if people hired us, you'd be lucky to work with Tonianne too. The beautiful thing about what we do, and generally the people that hire us, is they're hiring us to do these things, and that we're finding that these conversations are becoming increasingly important to companies. So when we started, everybody's just like, just give me iterations and I'm done. Now people are like, we really do actually need to understand who we are and what we do. So if you want to talk about those things, we would love to talk about you and talk to you. Yes. And again, if you go to either of those websites, there's a million ways to contact us on there. Sounds good.
Cool. And if I can ask Tonianne, a question to you, just to sort of put a full stop on the end of the conversation. If people are kind of interested in this topics or these topics we've been hearing, and they're looking for some way to start out or get going, what would you say is a good place to kind of kick off from?
I am the worst person promoting our stuff, but I would suggest they check out our LAVM program through Modus Institute, it stands for Lean Agile Visual Management. And we talk about building healthy operating systems, both for the individual, the team, and the organization. You know, one real quick thing that I wanted to add, Dr. Timothy Clark over at Leader Factor did some research, and he was talking about how this is going to be the first generation, the millennials, that go into the workforce, that there is an expectation for psychological safety, for being treated humane at work. It's not a nice to have anymore. They recognize it, and when they don't see it, they leave. So it's not like they're going to be the dead wood. That wood is gone. And so we risk losing a lot of talent if we don't start tending to people's social and psychological needs as well, building humane systems.
They're awesome. I like that.
I mean, that's somehow a perfect closing statement.
Yeah. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us this evening. It's been a fantastic conversation. I enjoyed it at least as much, if not more, than the conversations we had when we were preparing and kind of connecting and deciding what we were going to talk about. I hope that we get to continue these conversations at some point in the future, not only in front of a live audience, but maybe, who knows, we get to eat a real meal, have a glass of wine, and talk to each other kind of face to face. That would be most fantastic.
Yeah. We are craving that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think all of us are getting to that point, if not been there for a long time. So, yeah. To everyone on the stream, thank you so much for spending the last hour or so with us. It's been fantastic. As I like to say in very, very bad humor, please remember that the first rule of Flight Club is to always talk about Flight Club. So tell your friends, tell your family, invite some people, swing by. We do these roughly every 2 weeks, and we talk to lots of interesting people. And of course, as Klaus is reminding, hit the like and subscribe button, and we will see you when you're older. Thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Steph and Chris. Really appreciate it.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Cheers.